Good morning, everybody. I see folks are still connecting to audio, so I will let everybody do that. If you want to turn your camera on, feel free to do so. You also should not feel compelled to do that either. But I am Tristan Brown. I'm the Policy and Program Director here at the People's Parity Project, and really excited to be holding this op-ed panel slash workshop this morning, and really grateful for you all who I know, a lot of you are law students, to be joining us on a Saturday morning. You didn't have to do that, but you did, so happy to have you. And even more excited to have these fabulous panelists with us. Before I introduce the panelists and let them introduce themselves further, just want to shout out Molly Coleman, who is our Executive Director, and Steve Kennedy, who is our Organizing and Network Director, for also helping to execute this really great event this morning. And so without further ado, really happy to have Dan Wade on this panel with us this morning. Dan is a newly minted attorney. He's a recent graduate of Boston University Law School, and is really, really close to the seats that you all are in, for those of you who are law students. He has published an op-ed recently in Teen Vogue about the Supreme Court and the way they've been insidiously using the shadow docket. I know Molly has sent a few reminder emails that has that article linked, and other articles for myself and Madiba. And so Madiba Denny, she is an attorney and also a writer, particularly with Balls and Strikes. I know a lot of us are huge fans of Balls and Strikes, and I've probably read her readings there, but she's been published in other outlets, most recently in NBC, about Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court. If there's anything else that I left out for either of you, or anything else that you, any of you would like to add, including you, Molly and Steve, please feel free to jump in before we get going. Okay, sounds like I covered everything then. That's exciting. So no, happy to have you all at this Pitch Perfect event. I know many of you have expressed interest in writing and getting op-eds published, particularly with the recent nomination of Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court. And we were really excited to hear that, and thought that this would be a cool and hopefully effective way to make you all feel more comfortable starting drafting those op-eds and pitching those to various publications, whether they be local or national. And so we plan on getting into all of that today. And we were really excited, particularly because back in 2020, we kind of had a sustained op-ed campaign on corporate immunity, where a lot of our organizers placed various op-eds in various places. And I'm going to let Molly talk more about that and just the result of that. Not saying that the result is solely due to the op-ed campaign, but just how that was a helpful contribution to have.
I think we can definitely claim 100% full credit for this from the op-ed campaign. So quick correction to the record. Hey, everybody. Yeah, so one of the things that inspired this event is a push that we did a couple of years ago through PPP. It feels like yesterday, but apparently it was 2 years ago. I just dropped a link to our website where you can read more about this, but as some of you will recall, at the start of the COVID pandemic, there was a huge push to enact broad corporate immunity, basically saying that if you get sick at work, screw you, there's nothing you can do about it. If, even if your employer or your university or a business acted completely recklessly in allowing COVID to be spread in their space. Mitch McConnell and other people like Mitch McConnell were very into this type of legislation, immunizing businesses and corporate America from responsibility. So they wanted to, pass legislation. They were trying to move it really quickly. It was not getting a lot of attention and was really, really, really alarming, obviously, to those of us in the workers' rights and consumer rights spaces. Also, like anybody who cares about health and safety of human beings generally. So we partnered with some other, some allied organizations. And one of the things that we were really able to bring to that campaign was this massive op-ed writing operation. So in the link that I dropped, you'll see links to the op-eds that PPP organizers published: Alabama, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, California, truly across the country, trying to raise awareness about this issue. It's not something that I think the average person is like talking about at the grocery store. So really making sure people understood what corporate immunity was, what the consequences of this legislation would be, and that there was an obligation on all of us to try to stop it. again, maybe not the only thing that mattered in ending this legislation, but it was part of a larger campaign that ultimately killed the bill. Fortunately, it was very successful. And I think it was really exciting for us to see kind of the ways that using the power of law students and lawyers, people who understand the law, think about legal issues every single day, but also like for many of us, like, again, either in law school still, recent graduates, we also still speak like regular people and aren't so lawyer brained out that we explain things in a way that is incomprehensible to other people. So feeling like this is kind of the sweet spot. We have this ability to use the specialized knowledge that we've gained in law school, but translate it, make it more democratically accessible, and engage other people in these really, really critical fights. So anyway, we say all of this because it was a really, really exciting effort a couple of years ago, and we know that we're going to need efforts like this moving forward. We're going to need them in the next month to get Judge Jackson confirmed to the Supreme Court. We're going to need this over the summer when mainstream journalists are saying that we have like a 333 centrist court. And we all know that that's not true. And we need to explain to people why that is not the case, despite Adam Liptak or whoever else saying that things are really all going swimmingly at the Supreme Court. So I'll stop talking, but that's part of what we're really excited about. At the end of this, we're going to go into breakout groups and really talk through the ideas that you all have and kind of get ready to launch another campaign like this, really getting these op-eds out, getting these messages out. And yeah, that's that. I'll hand it back to Tristan.
Thank you, Molly. And so for the first half of this, we're just going to have a conversation, Madiba, Dan, and myself, but please don't feel like you just have to be an innocent bystander to the conversation. We encourage you all to submit your questions, whether you want to wait until the end of the conversation, or if you want to submit your questions in the chat box as you think of them. Please feel free to drop those in the chat box, because I would love to incorporate any questions or thoughts that you all may have into this conversation. And so we're going to break it up into just kind of like the various segments of from conception to publication, questions to include in this conversation. And so starting with just like the drafting portion of an op-ed. Okay, you have an idea that comes into mind because a current event has happened or a personal experience has happened that makes you feel inspired to write something. I know for a lot of people, there are different ways to go about starting that first draft, but Dan and Madiba, whichever of you would like to go first is cool with me. When you feel inspired to write something, what do you find works better for you in your process? Do you like to outline your thoughts beforehand, or do you find that just putting the pen to paper and getting all of your thoughts word vomited out works better to kind of accelerate that process for you?
So I feel like the word vomit approach is like helpful at the beginning in terms of like just getting some words on the page, but like vomit is still vomit. So what I like to do, like if I have an idea in my head, I try to like quickly get that down, because I might like think of a phrase and be like, oh, I want to hang on to this. Let me jot this down. But before I really dive into like writing the whole article, I like to stop and try at least somewhat outline my thoughts so I have an idea as to where the piece will be going. Sometimes I'll do like a bit of research first and like collect sort of like notes and ideas that I want in the piece. And then I can stop, look at all of that and think, okay, now that I have a sort of like jumbled bowl of all the things I think I want to be included, now I can think about structure and rearranging them and thinking, what are the things I think people need to know? Like what points do I need to establish on the way to get to the thing they really need to know? And so I can sort of outline it then. And that's helpful for me to like think about like what all I need to achieve. And in the course of drafting, I can look back to it and be like, okay, I need to do this thing, or like, okay, I have done this thing now, and now I can fully incorporate this thing. So a little bit of both, I would say, but like mostly, I think my better drafts come as a result of doing some amount of outlining first.
Yeah, I have a similar sort of thing, but I think my word vomiting, if you will, ends up happening by speaking. I'm like, I know I struggle greatly with like when I have like an idea and I'm like, I'm not sure where this should go and all that. What I end up doing is sort of just talking it out with people that have an idea of I have friends who are now lawyers, friends who are law students, whatever. And so it helps me a lot to just bounce ideas off them and get an idea of like where where this piece might go, where the idea might go, the different parts of it, the different nuances, and then going from there. Sometimes I struggle writing it all down, but getting that conversation sort of onto paper so that I can move it around and do the same sort of structuring that Medina was talking about. I think that's like because I think it's helpful to get, at least for me anyway, that it's really helpful to get everything out of your head in whatever way. It doesn't, it's obviously it's never going to be perfect right away. It's never going to be great from the beginning, but just having it not bouncing around in your head and out into somewhere, whether that's spoken into the world or on paper, really helps me a lot, because then it lets you do all the structuring later. You're not trying to do structuring and thinking about new and different things. It like gets easier to break it up into getting words out versus moving them around.
I want to follow up real quick, if I can jump back in, because Dan, the way you phrase that of like things bouncing around in your head, I feel that's so hard. Like sometimes I like literally feel like there are just sort of ideas like bouncing off the walls inside my brain, and I just want to make sure I like get those things down. So what I've started doing, I literally just have a Google Doc now that I can like pull up on my phone at any point when I have a random idea. I think the doc is titled something like things bouncing around in my head. And so I'll just jot it down real quick. So even if it's a fragment of an idea, I can come back to it later and then do that sort of reorganizing. And I feel like it's really helpful so I don't lose things whenever I have like a little spark when something occurs to me.
I was just going to say thank you for giving me this idea to create a Google Doc of things bouncing around in my head. I never thought of that, but I think that would be helpful. Dan, did you want to add something else there?
Yeah, I think that I should start doing that. I think I end up just sort of like asking my friends like, hey, what did I say the other day? Which maybe I should write it down as opposed to relying on the. But I think but I think it's easy to, and but you saying that just sort of made me think like this is like a creative process. Like we don't think of it as such sometimes because it's like talking about law and all that, and like that's not, you don't think of creativity when you're talking about law, but this is like it's a creative process, and sometimes creates it like the inspiration or the spark hits you all the time at weird hours at different times. Like it's good. You never know when it might hit you. So it's good to capture it in the moment, and then you can work on it. You can work on it later, but that spark doesn't come back, at least not the same way after the first time it hits you.
So I'd like to think that we all have our own voice when it comes to writing. Obviously, you have your own speaking voice, but we all just kind of have our own different styles. But I think it's also true that when you are thinking about writing something and you want to get it to a particular audience, you may have to adjust what that voice is or what that tone is, especially if you're trying to persuade a group of people about something, whether it's a legislative bill, whether it's to confirm someone to the bench, or even to inform people who may not necessarily be aware of what it is that you're talking about. You may find yourself having to adjust your voice a little bit. And so my question is just, if you have ever found yourself needing to adjust who you normally sound like, or who you want to be perceived as, how do you do that in a way where you're still remaining true to yourself and true to who you are as a writer?
That's definitely something I think about all the time in the course of writing, because, there are a couple of different things here. One is like, not everything is for everybody. And so like you can talk with some audience in a way that you like might not communicate with other audiences. Also, different audiences might have different starting points of like background knowledge. So you may need to do like more introductory type work of like laying the foundation for like a publication in one place than you might need to for another, where you're like, okay, I know everybody here. Like if you're reading this publication, you're already familiar with these concepts. So I don't need to like really explain it. I can just sort of dive into it. Also, sometimes I think about who the reader might be in terms of like how much of myself I can be. And then I'm like, okay, even though I'm furious about this thing, like I know that like more stuffy elder types read this publication and they're going to see like, instead of righteous anger, they're going to see like angry Black woman. And so I'm like, okay, let me like recalibrate so this person like I can like keep their focus. So it does depend a bit. Which can be like frustrating at points, because like you said, you like need to keep your integrity. So I definitely like work to make sure that anything I'm saying like is still something that I feel comfortable with, and that I still feel like, okay, like this is me talking. But yeah, I think you definitely need to think about your audience, because you want them to do something with the piece, presumably, like whether it's to come away more informed or come away inspired to like take some sort of action. So I think you need to like always be considering like what your goals are for the piece and like what you want the reader to take away from it. And that does mean tailoring the way in which you speak sometimes. But yeah, so it totally depends on the audience. Like you mentioned some of my balls and strikes work. And balls and strikes is a really fun outlet for me, because I feel like I can sort of seamlessly go back and forth between like legal analysis and also being a smartass. So that's a thing I enjoy. But like I might not be like as explicitly sassy if I'm writing for The Nation, because it's like a little bit of a different audience. So yeah, I think those are the takeaways. Oh, one more thing I would add when thinking about different audiences is also the technical terms, because we've been, you know, steeped in the tea of law school for a while, and so yeah, I think you're just, you know, you're in that water. You're like fully accustomed to some of these terms that nobody who is lucky enough to not be a lawyer has any familiarity with, right? So you might need to either not use the terms at all and just sort of explain what the practical consequences are, or like just sort of like make it clear quickly and easily by using like normal person words. Yeah, so like lay people in addition to law people will understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all that don't have much to add other than I think that it's really easy after coming out of law school to like totally buy into the artifice of law, if you will. Like that it's super easy to be like, to like, even when you're like a 1L, to like jump to like go all the way in on using the jargon and all that, like because it feels good. It gives you a structure to work from, and you have all these people who talk this way. All your professors do it. All the reading you've read in law school is people doing that kind of structure. And I think it's really important to get out of that structure whenever you can. I mean, even when you're doing like, I think it applies to more than just like op-ed writing. Like it applies to like actual legal writing too. Like cutting away at the jargon, making it much more like plain and direct English it makes you a better writer, and it makes your words have a lot more effect because people can grasp them much more quickly, which means that you can deal with more complicated concepts and get to them quicker and get people to understand them better than if you just used all of the like jargon, high level jargon language that we lawyers use all the time, despite the fact of not thinking about the real value of using that jargon.
I think I would like to add there as well. You know, you mentioned, Dan, the idea of like it feels good to use that language, and I wanna like interrogate that a little bit, because I think it does, because that's what makes you part of the group, right? Like you are part of the elite lawyer club if you can speak that foreign lawyer language. So like it gives you like a sense of like legitimacy, like you can be taken seriously if you can speak the language. But people outside of the like ivory tower, they don't speak that language, and it's not conveying any like additional legitimacy. It's just creating confusion and making the actual stakes and actual consequences like obscuring them. It's very easy to obscure the real consequences if you like just rely on the technical terms. I think Molly and Tristan, I think you both may have mentioned this, the idea of like people talking about like the 333 court, which does not exist, and perhaps like taking things credulously at face value, being like, oh, well, they didn't use the magic words Roe was overturned, so that means that Roe is still fine. And so if you can actually describe it, you know, break away from the technical term and be like, no, even though like those precise words were not used, so like maybe, you know, in the abstract law brain version, it wasn't explicitly overturned, but millions of people have been essentially denied abortion access in Texas. So like, what is that if not overturned? So just like make the consequences real, so people know like what's actually going on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean that, and like that, like legal formalism in that, like in that sort of sense, like it really just, at least in my opinion, like it really just sort of ruins how people talk about the law, and how it, like both lawyers, professors, and lay people talking about the law, because it's so easy to see law as this sort of like abstract structure that like does everything, and you can't ever get away from the fact that law affects people directly. It's not some structure that people act on and like sits in a vacuum. Law only exists in the way that it affects people. So you can't ever forget to, at least I would think, you can't ever forget to center that direct feeling that it has on people.
So I know many of us, if you're a lawyer, if you're a law student, you remember once or currently being in a legal research and writing class, and being taught by a professor perhaps how to approach brief writing, how to approach memo writing, and there almost just being a formulaic way to approach and just kind of plug in various elements to write an effective memo or an effective brief. Do either or both of you find that there is a similar formula when it comes to writing an op-ed? Are there particular elements that should absolutely be included? If there are, do you think that there's a sequential order that goes with it? Or is it something that, maybe not?
Like, I think there's probably like things that have to be included only insofar as, like making your point clear, like establishing what it is you're talking about, establishing why that matters, and establishing what they're supposed to do about it. Like I think those are maybe like your core components that have to be included. But otherwise, I think it's like a little bit flexible. Like it might depend on like what the topic is. But yeah, I think the core thing, is like an op-ed is what, like an opinion piece. So like make sure you're stating your opinion. Like that's the most important thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think as well, like for like when you learn legal writing in law school, like you're learning how to write a very specific thing that's doing a very specific task. Whereas like the point of the op-ed is to be very freeform. You get to control what it's supposed to do a lot more than I think you would if you're writing a brief, for example. And I think like like Deepa said, like the things to include there, like there are obviously there are core components of just making arguments that you have to put in there. But I think, if you want to inform people, if you're writing an op-ed that's meant to just inform people versus an op-ed that's meant to be a real call to action, those are going to look different. And the things that are going to be in there are going to be different. But I think it just comes down to, what do you want the piece to do and what do you want people to take away from it? And that what you put in there sort of flows from there.
I have another addendum, because this just reminded me of something that completely infuriated me and I think was useless advice at the time, in the context, and I'll explain why. But I think might be somewhat good advice for op-ed writing. Because I remember when I was a law student, I was stressed about exams, as one does in law school. And my father, who is not a lawyer, mind you, was like, "Oh, like it seems very simple to me. All you need to do is just state your argument and state the evidence. So just do that," which was so frustrating, as I'm sure you can imagine. But in the course of like writing, I think that could actually be useful, advice to keep in mind, like what is your argument? What is your evidence? So what's the point you're trying to make? And like, how do you justify this?
I will add, I think all of that is true. I'll add, at least for me, I don't know, I feel like I've always been told this since I was like in elementary school and like language arts class, is reading various authors helps to develop your own writing style, because you read and, find things that you like, you don't like, or whatever. And so I don't know, for me, at least, I think making it a habit to like try to read an op-ed a week, whether it's on court reform or just like various topics. It's interesting just to see how people, can keep those same core components in all of these pieces, but they're kind of diversifying the voice based on what their style is. And so I think for folks who are new to just writing op-ed specifically, just reading from different authors, opinion pieces may be helpful to see what the different styles are and what you may identify more so with as you approach your own writing of various pieces. So, okay, you've finished writing this draft. How important is it for you to have another set of eyes on it? Or do you just feel like after you finish writing it, like, damn, that looks great. I'm pitching it, I'm submitting it, and we're done here. Or do you make it a habit to have another set of eyes, whether it's a colleagues, of friends, of family members? If you do, is it like multiple sets of eyes before you feel comfortable submitting a final piece?
Yeah, I definitely need another set of eyes, at least one other set of eyes. And some often more than that too. Because sometimes different eyes have different purposes. So I feel like sometimes I've consulted a colleague who might have more experience in a particular area than me. And so I like want to, like check my assumptions here, or check that I am indeed like stating the law correctly on this, or if there are any sort of considerations that they might be more aware of because like they're extra involved in it that I might not be considering. So I think that's like one good type of like proofreading or editing, engagement, collaboration that you can do. Another type is like simply to see like, is this making sense? So for that, I might like to go to like a non-lawyer especially and be like, do you know what I'm trying to say here? Like, do these words make sense to you? Like, is this clear? And a final set of eyes I really like to go to my mom for, I always love to have her input. And also, there are two things here. My mom is like my biggest hype man. And so this serves a couple functions. So one is if I'm not sure about something, she can actually be like, no, of course you should submit it. And two is that if my mom has like some doubts about something and is skeptical, then I'm like, oh, wow, okay, mom loves everything I write and she's concerned about this. So maybe I need to reevaluate if like even she has some skepticism.
I send all my drafts to my mom too when I am doing it. Absolutely. I mean, it's, nothing beats, at least my opinion, nothing beats a family member reading it for you. But, but to the value of having other eyes, I've never written anything other than exams where I haven't had someone else look at it. It's extremely valuable. Like I keep like it. I don't honestly don't see why you wouldn't get an extra set of eyes or more than one if you can. I think something that I like doing as well, in addition to all the things that Diva talked about, is like for certain things, like it's nice for me anyway to submit something to someone who I know is going to disagree with it, because it's nice to get someone who's like predisposed sort of against the point you're trying to make, because I think you can start changing it to, if you feel like you can start changing it to include like counter arguments or preemptions of points that someone might raise, because they they'll bring up the reasons why they think you're wrong, and then you can sort of include why they're wrong about you being wrong in the piece, and that can be it can give it more force if you can get it in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's true. I know many of us, when you have like spent a number of days with a piece, you start to feel almost like overprotective of it, and you don't sometimes want to seek criticism. But I think it's totally right that having other sets of eyes to help strengthen the piece, or even to help adjust it where it may be necessary, is super valuable. So, okay, you've had folks look at it. We're ready to pitch it somewhere. So what does the pitching process look like? Do I just send an email to Jay Willis of Balls and Strikes saying, hello, please see attached, and let me know when you're publishing my piece? Or is there a bit more selling that goes into submitting an attached article, but also just kind of trying to convince an editor why it may make sense for them to publish it in their publication?
Definitely got to sell it. Absolutely got to sell it. And so sometimes as I'm preparing to sell, I might do like a little bit of scheming / lurking, by which I mean I'll like follow various editors on Twitter and like look through their likes or like look and see what they're posting about to be like, okay, this editor seems like they'll be receptive to this kind of argument. So like this will be the right person for me to send it to. Like definitely do some targeting, figure out like who's doing the writing and who's doing the editing and the kinds of areas you're interested in, because that might help you, you know, direct who this should go to. You should also check their like websites to see if they have any guidance. Because some places have like particular ways they want to receive pitches. Like some will say, don't send me a full draft because I want to be able to like work with you on the construction of the draft. So just send me like a description, like a paragraph saying like who you are, what you're writing about, why it's important, and why you're the right person to write about it. And like, and then we'll talk. Or like include a link to like say anything you may have like published before that's like, you know, related so they can refer to that. Some places might say, don't send me an attachment. I'm afraid of like viruses. So just copy the text of your article into the email itself. So, you know, if people have any guidelines like that, you'll want to know that from the jump so you don't like do something they might have expressly said they don't want done. And then you could potentially, you know, like upset what could have been a possible relationship there. Because, you know, like it shouldn't, I feel like, you know, just like an attachment or something shouldn't be that big of a deal, but, you know, it's better to err on the side of caution, at least as you're like starting to develop these relationships. So yeah, I think targeted solicitation, saying, you know, like I've like written this article about this issue, or like I would like to write an article for you about this issue. I think that this thing matters for this reason, and that like your publication is a great place for it for this reason. I'm especially well situated to write about this for this, then the other. Because I think that's a, you know, as we're thinking about voice, that's a thing that I think editors will care about as well, because they'll be like, well, you know, why you? Like, even if I grant that this idea is good, why are you the right person to write about it? So I think then it's nice to be, you know, like if you're a lawyer, if you're a law student, be like, I am familiar with this issue, or like I have worked on this topic, or like I have this personal experience that makes this thing relevant, or no one is talking about this in the way that they should be. Like there's something that's being missed from the discourse right now. So you should have me write about this thing because like I have this unique insight that would be important to uplift. So yeah, I think, you know, you situate yourself as to like why you are the right person to write about this thing that matters. And yeah, and then just, you know, send the hell out of it. Just like send that email to like a bunch of people. Not all editors like that, I'll admit, because they want to have like special dibs on who gets to publish it. But honestly, I do it anyway. Because you don't know who's going to say yes. And like sometimes, you know, the news cycle moves quickly. And so sometimes I just feel like it could be better to just play the odds, you know, do the numbers game thing.
Yeah, I have very little to add beyond that, because that was an excellent, at least I think, a very excellent way of putting it all. I think really I feel like it's really like an editor is looking to see that you've like done the work to make the piece a reality. That like you're not just like guessing at what you want to do. You're not just like, you know, you're not winging it. Like you have a clear idea. You know where you want to go if you haven't written it, or if you have written it, then you've gone somewhere. And like that, I think like that, I feel like editors are looking for that maybe above all, because it, you know, if you're an editor and all of a sudden someone's like sending you this half-baked idea, you're going to get passed over. It's so it like something I remember reading, pre-zombification Deadspin, if you will, they had a pitch guide, and they basically walked through what the pitch looked like that became an article that they published. And it was really cool, because the successful pitches, basically you could see the shape of where they wanted to go in the pitch email. They had shown that like either they'd done a bunch of research to make that to show that the piece could go somewhere, or they had a real clear vision of where they wanted the piece to go, if it was a personal thing. And it like, you could tell right away that they knew where they want, that the piece was basically fully formed at least in their head. And that, I think, being able to show that to an editor, I think, is really important, because it gets them to buy into what you want to say right away.
So Madiba, you kind of started answering this next question a little bit when you talked about the targeted solicitation based on, what the tweet stalking creeping results were. But are there any other factors or considerations that you should think about when deciding what publications or editors it may make sense to make a particular pitch to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes there's this idea to maybe like shoot your shot for like the best, most like laudable publication ever. Just like, like I'm going to get into like the New York Times or something. And like you can and you should like shoot for that. But it also still worth considering, like, are there places where you might be like more likely to get published, or are there places where it might have like a bigger impact? Like if it's say like a more local issue or something, like you might want like a particular audience to be reading it. So so it doesn't necessarily need to be like this has to be in like the Washington Post or bust. Like there are sometimes that you can like shop around a little bit, or yeah, it's like useful to think about like who is your audience and like where can I reach them. So that doesn't necessarily mean like it has to be in the most highfalutin publication you have access to.
I think as well sometimes it's also worth like thinking about places that publish the kinds of things that you're trying to do. So like Balls and Strikes is a great example. Like the whole ethos is to publish, it's published like a critical left view of legal issues, Supreme Court, et cetera, like that. And if you agree with the kinds of things that get published, or if you like the things that get published, I think it's worth pitching those places, even if, obviously, like, don't want to talk negatively of Balls and Strikes because I love them and they do everything. But it's not like Balls and Strikes is not the New York Times, and it's not trying to be. And and it's good that it's not trying to be. And I think it's worth really deeply considering those places that aren't trying to be like, the New York Times, Washington Post, like highest level lauded like newspapers, magazines. Like sometimes like looking at those other places they are better fits for your piece, especially depending on what you're trying to do with it.
I just got permission from Kristen to jump in really quickly on this, because I really think a couple of things. First of all, since a lot of you are in law school, like not undervaluing placing an op-ed in your campus paper or your law school paper is super, super important. And then the other thing, and I think we'll get to this further on in the conversation, but like we're in the age of social media. It's not just New York Times and Washington Post op-eds that can get a huge amount of traction. I was thinking about this in the context of Supreme Court advocacy a couple of years ago when Brett Kavanaugh was undergoing his confirmation process. I'm sure you all remember that. A couple of friends and I wrote an op-ed, not even in our campus newspaper, but literally in like our law school blog about how Brett Kavanaugh shouldn't be teaching at Harvard. And it went kind of viral. It ended up getting covered in the Washington Post and he had to withdraw from his teaching position. And that is literally from an op-ed we wrote for a blog that I don't think anybody edited because it was run by law students who had better things to do with their time than edit our stupid op-ed. So really, really thinking about like, I think it feels really cool and exciting to think about, aiming as high as you can. And again, there's huge value in that, and not to tell people not to aim high because you should. But I think thinking really strategically about who are we trying to influence? Who do we need to hear this message? Where do I have a relationship? Where might I be able to get a piece picked up? And going from there is, in some ways, I think can be even more valuable than kind of aiming as high as you can.
Yeah, I'm glad you all started talking about it because I wanted to get into, ironically enough, just this idea of feeling comfortable and excited about placing op-eds in more local community newspapers or publications to get your point across. I think especially right now, if we're talking about Judge Jackson's confirmation and her impending becoming a justice on the Supreme Court, a lot of people are writing op-eds about that, obviously. And so when there's something where everybody's writing about something, it may not make sense to try to add your voice to, and I don't want to keep dropping the New York Times to like, I don't know, I'm just trying not to be shady with them specifically. If you're talking about the Washington Post or other major publications, it may not make sense to try to add your voice to the numbers of folks who are likely trying to do the same thing. But if there are any other points that folks wanted to add on just the value of placing in local or community publications, please feel free to add.
I think I'll add one more point because it's something I've been thinking a lot about recently. Because I think part of, when we go for the legacy media type publications, one of the things we're trying to do there often is, like reach the like decision makers, like the senators or something, which is absolutely important. And like there's like a place for that and a role for that in terms of like advocacy strategy. But something I've been thinking about a bit more is like, to what extent are we just like missing like a whole like class of people, like a whole swath who like might not be like regularly reading, these types of publications. And they might not be like the decision makers like in the legislature or in the executive, but like they can make the lives of the decision makers a bit more difficult. And like you can like empower them with like the knowledge and tools they need to go, like have like a sit-in at their like local legislator's office or something. So I think it's sort of like an undertapped resource there a bit. So we can maybe can and should start thinking more about like meeting those people where they are as well.
Yeah, that just makes me think of the annoying paywalls that you usually hit when you are trying to read major publications, and how that a lot of times serves as a barrier for folks who may want access to information, but are either not able to access that information, or if you're like me, I'm just like, okay, I really don't care enough to proceed with trying to read what you're saying. So I think that's just another point to consider. Now, there's like this timeliness piece. A lot of times, news is happening really quickly and like you feel like, yes, I want to write about something and I want to do it really fast so I don't miss my window. But realistically, sometimes when there is something that's really fast paced happening, it might not be super easy to get placed anywhere, honestly. And so what is the value, if any, in self-publishing yourself? There are a lot of platforms or blog post spaces like Medium and other places where you can kind of set up your own little channel and post your own things. And I don't know, maybe use your social media to try to amplify what it is that you want to say. So I don't know if anybody has ever self-published, but if you have, or even if you haven't, just talking about the value of doing that when it's hard to get placed.
I feel a couple ways about it. Because like I have like self-published like a tiny handful of things, but I do think the ones that I've published with like, actual outlets or something like have had a wider reach. But then by the same token, Molly spoke about a thing that was like a sort of random law school blog that took off. So I think that it can go in either direction. I had another thought, but I lost it. So I'm going to mute for a second and it'll come back to me.
Relatable.
Yeah, I'm sort of, I've sort of two minds about it as well, because it's the magic of the internet is that it's, one, really easy to publish yourself, and two, it's really easy to share what you've self-published in a way that it was much more difficult before, unless you were, like an oil baron. So I think like, but I think that like it's good to get stuff out there, but I think like going through the process of like getting edited and like having someone put a critical eye on your piece can really push things to another level that you wouldn't get when it's just you publishing your own stuff. Like, yet you can be as self-critical as you want, but you always will have your own blind spots, especially about your own writing, that I think having like a real editor does a lot for it. And like, not to say that self-publishing is bad, and I think like it's especially really good. Like, in people's self-published things have like shaken up industries. Like, it's not like it's like, at least in my own like personal feelings about this. Like, I think it's worth trying to get published and get an editor to see and to believe in you and all that. But like, if it doesn't work out, there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, because it like your piece can have value and can have effect, and putting it on Medium and sharing it with people is a real worthwhile thing to do.
I'm thrilled to announce that the thought has come back to me. So I would like to throw out there as an alternative to self-publishing as well, even if you missed the timeliness thing. Honestly, you can wait a little bit because the nature of our like legal and political system is that some of the things that we care about are near perpetually relevant, or it's like they will become relevant again. So like I definitely have had like articles that I've pitched before and like didn't get picked up. And then like months later, something super similar is happening again. And I'm just like, these whole like 3 paragraphs still work. And then I can just like make moves on it then. So I would say that, you know, like even if something doesn't work out with pitching or like the timeliness news hook doesn't work, like it's okay to like take a beat and maybe come back to it later because it probably still matters and it's still important.
I'm glad you said that. Unfortunately for us, many of these issues are longstanding and have not been resolved for quite some time. So if you have paragraphs laying around, there is value in them, I'm sure, as time progresses. Okay, so you have been picked up. Somebody's going to be publishing your piece. And you obviously want people to read your words, whether that audience is the general public, whether it's decision makers, policymakers, whatever. A big part of achieving this goal of having as many people as possible reading your stuff is like promoting your stuff. And I know for us as lawyers, we're a lot of times conditioned by professors and just like by the nature of the profession to, you know, be really careful about what we're saying, particularly on social media, and almost kind of like silencing your personality and who you are as a person. But is there a way, or have you all found a way to kind of push through that awkward, icky feeling of being like, hello, everyone, I have written this. It would be great if you read it. And honestly, doing that more than one time.
Definitely do it more than one time. Do it all the time. Share it all the time. I know it feels weird because, you know, like, yeah, self-promotion sometimes feels icky, but also if it's something you care about, then like, I think that that can come through. You can say like, you know, this thing is relevant, like this thing matters. Like, that's why I wrote about it, and you can share it. And sometimes, you know, this is like extra, sometimes it feels a little icky, but it's okay to like reach out to someone and be like, I thought that you would be interested in this, like based off this like other thing that you've like said or you've written about. Like it feels like we have like, yeah, a common interest here. I feel like people are not like straight up opposed to that. Like maybe sometimes they can be if people are like aggressive about it. Like I know I've like, you know, I've experienced it before where someone like message me out the blue and be like, share my piece. And I'm like, whoa, hang on, like, I don't know you. But if someone reaches out and is like, hey, I saw that you wrote about this topic. I've also written about this topic. I would love for you to take a look at it. I feel like I'm inclined to take a look at that and then share it sometimes. Also, in terms of, you know, like sharing stuff repeatedly, like I know it feels weird, but you should absolutely go for it. And like I have concrete proof that it works out because I've like said before on like a post being like, I feel a little weird sharing this again, but I'm gonna re-up this for the evening crowd, like in case you weren't on Twitter this morning. And I've had someone reply being like, oh yeah, no, thank you. Like I wasn't online this morning, I didn't see this, now I have it. And like, I'm gonna share it too. And so it's like perfect, like validation. So just, yeah, go ahead and share it, like repost it a couple times a day, multiple days. You can also email it to folks and like have them send it out to their networks as well. Like I've done that before when it's like, I know I'm working with a group on an issue and that like, I'm like, I feel like they'll care about this topic and they know other people who care about this topic. And so, you know, like if everybody tells somebody, then everybody knows. So.
Yeah, I think it's worth also as well, like sending it to people, like if you send it to people, like saying like, hey, I wrote about this thing, I want to hear your thoughts, or like, I think you might appreciate this. Like you might convince them of your point and then they'll share it to people. Like I know that for the most recent op-ed that I wrote with Tristan, like I sent it to like family members who like didn't agree with my position and they read it and like they now agree and they shared it with all their friends. Like it, like you can like, it's like it's worth sending it to people, because like you might convince them, and then that you can get them to convince other people, and it'll spread naturally, like with word of mouth that way. I mean, obviously, like, word of mouth it's hard to get word of mouth to everyone in the world, but like, especially when you're writing for like a more local publication, like don't forget about word of mouth, because it really absolutely has an effect.
I would also add, in addition to getting that particular piece shared, it could get you opportunities for future pieces. I've definitely had that happen as well, where I like sent something to someone and was like, like, I've seen you write about or speak about like this thing. Like, I too am interested in this, like, here you go. And then like months and months later, they hit me up being like, oh, like, I'm working on this other thing. And because of that other stuff you wrote, I thought about you. Like, would you be interested in doing this too? So there's like a great way that you can, build out your own network and expand the kinds of things you get to do as well, if you just sort of, go ahead and take that leap of like reaching out to that person.
I'm going to quick jump in and tout a strategy that I've never actually used myself, but that I really recommend because I respect people who do this. Is there's an attorney who writes all the time about worker justice issues, who publishes really, really important articles, but they can be a little niche. They're easy to miss. And she has a list of people in her life who she sends every single article to and has suggested tweets. And it makes it so easy. She's like, hey, I wrote this. If you're inclined to share, I've drafted a couple of tweets. They fit in the character limit. They say what the article's about, and I do it all the time. I copy, I paste, I hit send, because I want that message out there, but like, drafting tweets is really hard, especially if it's like in the morning or pre-coffee or whatever. And I just think like that, and again, you don't do that with strangers, but people in your life who want to uplift your work, I think that can be a really, really valuable practice.
That is a new one that I'm glad I just heard about. In addition to everything that folks have added, shout out to Terry. But in addition to all these points that folks have added, I would just add, if one of your intended audiences that you want your message to be received by is, for example, a decision maker, legislators, or policymakers, it is so okay to send your piece to like a staffer of theirs or something. If you're writing on a particular issue and there's a senator, for example, who is already on board with that message or on board with that issue, sending them something as an additional resource that they can send to their colleagues that they're trying to convince to co-sponsor a particular bill, or even sending it to staff offices that are kind of like on the fence about whether they want to co-sponsor something or just flat out don't agree with it. It's okay to get them to read your perspective by emailing a staffer something of yours. And so I would just add that as an additional way to get your work uplifted, or at least to kind of create those additional opportunities for you to be seen as a resource on particular issue areas. And kind of segueing on that point, and my final question before I open it up to the rest of you all to ask questions is, how can leveraging social media, we've kind of talked about it a little bit already, but how can leveraging social media to spread your op-eds help to expand who your personal audience is and to kind of shape your brand? I touched a little bit on lawyers being hesitant to like even be active on social media, but if you are someone who wishes to kind of be seen as a resource on particular subject matter areas or issues that you can contribute your expertise on, just how can op-eds and marrying that with social media be leveraged, if you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I've definitely, been able to share my like articles and to like a much broader audience, like because of social media, and like have like made additional connections because of that, and like expanded my own network. I think you're absolutely right. Like when you say there's like an extra level of cautiousness among like lawyers, but in particular when it comes to doing this sort of putting yourself out there, potentially breaking from a mold thing. I guess I recommend rejecting that. Like just go for it. I don't know. Maybe this is like not super good advice. Like I'm just thinking about how I frequently like just go for it anyway. Like in like a lot of aspects of life, which I have, some friends like question me about like, this is really like bold or like brave or potentially disregarding potential consequences, but it hasn't failed me yet. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna cuss on that. I think like at some point, if these kinds of things matter to you, you have to just go for it. Like it's easy, you know, it's easy to you know, learn the message from law school that like, no, you should keep these sort of things private or whatever, that you should, you know, you should be above the fray. But like, these things matter. They matter to our lives. They matter to everyone's lives. Like these are fundamental issues that everyone can and should have thoughts on. And not only is there nothing wrong with sharing those thoughts, I think it's wrong to hold them back. Like these systems that we have problems with and we have critiques with and want to make better, they continue as they are when people don't say anything. Like, and to make changes, you have to say what's going on now isn't right. And either just that it's not right, or like, here's what we can do to fix it or whatever. But like, it starts with saying this thing isn't right. You have to make the first statement for everything else to follow.
I think that's extremely well said, Dan. And like, you know, like that's why we're doing this all, right? It's like there's something that matters. There's something that we like want or like need to see done. And so I think the potential risk is worth it because like what we're fighting for is so much bigger.
Oh my gosh, I feel very inspired, and I'm not trying to be corny, but I do. No, I would just add, you know, I think the term expert is one that is subjective, and certainly there are varying levels of expertise on things. But I mean, for many of us, the legitimacy that Madiba mentioned earlier with, or that comes along with being a lawyer or being a law student, almost provides you the credibility, whether it's undeserved or not, to really weigh in on something and to offer your literal opinion based on the specialized knowledge that you have. And so just kind of tapping into that and feeling comfortable calling yourself an expert on things is one thing that I would say is completely okay. And the more you write about these things and the more that you weigh in on these issues, the more you will feel comfortable identifying yourself as an expert or as a writer on something, especially if you feel comfortable and desire to kind of write on a particular topic, or even if it becomes a wide array of topics that you're talking about. I want to open up to everybody else. If you have any questions, please feel free to either drop them in the chat, use the raise hand feature, or just take yourself off of mute and ask a question you have before we do the breakout room thing, because I want to make sure that everybody leaves feeling like they have no questions unanswered. Leah.
Hi, thank you guys so much for coming. This is super helpful and interesting. I'm just wondering about something you both mentioned, just like about writing in plain language. Like I want to be a public defender, and so our like public defender professor is always saying like, you guys talk too much like lawyers and you need to like talk like regular people. And that's like, it's like, I didn't think I was gonna have an issue with that, but like law school really drums it like into you. But so I'm just wondering, like, I feel like and one of the things that I'm interested in is just like what you're saying, like demystifying law, deprofessionalizing law. It's like law should be for the people, but somehow it's not. But I'm just wondering, like, in that, like, have you guys met any pushback, or is that something like, you know, if you're publishing like an op-ed, because I feel like the other side is very invested in keeping law as like an in-group. And so is like, I don't know, is that something that you guys like can speak to about how you think about that? Like, I totally appreciate what you're saying about like it has to be said, but I feel like they're like, is there going to come a time where they're going to like the other side's going to realize like what we're up to? I don't know if that makes sense.
That definitely makes sense. I think that's a really good point. I don't think I've experienced pushback on that front yet, insofar as, you know, like making things more comprehensible. It's possible that that's like a feature of where I've been publishing and stuff. But also, I think Dan mentioned this earlier, that like layman speak is often simply just better writing. So they might be inclined to, you know, go ahead and accept it anyway, like even if it is in a sort of like demystified way, just because it makes more sense for everyone. And I think there are ways to, still maintain that sense of like legitimacy, even if you're using more like normal language. And that comes from, like the strength of like what it is you're saying. It comes from like your own credentials or like your own experience. And, you could potentially like use data or like other sorts of like case law as evidence, where it's like you can justify your argument without using like the highly specialized technical terms. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree. Like it's absolutely not only okay. I would think I would say it's better. I mean, I get this all the time with the lawyers that I work with, like they're in my day job. Like they're all the time saying like, cut the jargon, like make it clearer, like make it more like you're really talking to, like, because it even when you're writing like a brief, like even when you're like writing like an appellate brief for for like a real like federal appeal, like that kind of like the best briefs are clear and plain spoken and cut right to the heart of the issue. And your op-ed writing, your like all your other writing should do it as well. There's no, I think the only time that like jargon is useful is when you're using it when there's really no other way to talk about a complicated concept, because it's it like jargon exists to help represent complicated concepts in shorthand, but it's only useful when you have really no other way to represent that concept. Like it's otherwise you should be like even when you're writing your your briefs for law school, or like you're doing it in your day job as a lawyer or whatever, like writing in plain language and writing with clarity is so much more important than like using technical terms. I mean, I before law school I was an engineer, and I would see this all the time, like completely unintelligible writing because people want to write, they want to write with all the tech terms they know, and like it's so frustrating. It's because you didn't like you wrote all these words and you didn't say anything. All you did was spit jargon at me. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with what you said? Like, get it. I think it's extremely important to get rid of all of that stuff wherever you can.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think for me, a big part of why I found law school to be very unenjoyable was I just kind of felt confused, like intentionally. A lot of times, like it was just like you're almost being intentionally misled with the language when you could easily be given the really cut and dry of what it is that you need to know. And so I think when you keep that in mind and kind of remember that feeling for people who are lay people reading your audience, especially if that is who your intended audience is, just wanting to make sure people not only feel leaving informed, but they don't leave feeling like this person just kind of wanted to use these big terms on me to make me feel like inferior almost to what it is I need to be knowing. And so I think as long as your audience that you're trying to reach are people who need to understand what it is that you're saying so they can leave, with the call to action you're giving them, or leave feeling more informed about an issue that's harmful or that's helpful to communities that are relevant to them, then you're fine, translating that jargon into language that is easily accessible. Esme.
Hello. Thank you so much for this training. My question is about, in the context of the process that Tristan laid out, what does the timeline look like for like the beginning of the idea to, putting that out on Twitter? Like, will it depend on if you're hitting an issue that's just, really hot in the news cycle or not? So like, what does that timeline usually look like?
I think you're spot on that it depends on some of the like political and news context. Like if something's more like maybe more of an evergreen topic or has like a hook that's like will continue to be in the news for a bit, I've taken sometimes like 2 weeks or something like that. But also I had an occasion once, I think it was maybe a month or two ago, where I had tweeted some idea I had, and then an editor who I'm mutuals with DM'd me and was like, can you like write an article's worth about that by tomorrow? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. So like, I think it sometimes depends on like what the topic is and like how, I guess, transient the topic might be in the news that week. while I do really want to convince more news editors that they, in a sense, make the news and they can decide if something stays in the news, I have not yet broken through with that, and they are still like really into this idea of like newsiness and timeliness. So sometimes it's like a really quick turnaround, but if there is something more persistent, you can get some more time out of it as well.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that one. That's like, I think it's dead on. It's like all these timelines are valid, like, and it just entirely depends on what the issue is and what you're writing about and how you go about making the argument you want to make.
Just keep those paragraphs on you per Mediva. Don't trash them, save the doc, and I'm sure you'll be able to revisit it later for better or for worse. Any other questions from folks? Marisa says, do you have any recommendations for publications that are more receptive to writers with relatively few clips?
I think Balls and Strikes definitely is, because I know like part of what they're doing with the publication, as they're like changing how the law is talked about, but they're also changing who talks about the law. And that like I know from conversations with Jay, he's just said like, send me someone you think has a good idea. Like, I don't care if they haven't been published before. Just like, is what they're saying smart? Cool. So I think that they would definitely be down for something like that. And I think this is an area as well where I would recommend doing that sort of like creep in on editors, because if you can find out like what somebody is interested in, they might not care as much about like if you've been published on this thing before, if it's like squarely in their wheelhouse.
I would just add, don't underestimate the power of like co-authoring with people, especially if you have relationships like with a professor of yours, or if you did an internship or are doing an internship and maybe you pitch that as an idea to like your internship supervisor. Like, I think it'd be really great if, us as this organization weighed in on this. I'd be happy to take a first crack. Love that phrase. Happy to take a first crack at drafting something. And then, it shows that you're taking initiative, but also it kind of helps you to attach yourself or to an entity that may make it easier to place yourself, as opposed to trying to get yourself placed when you are starting out kind of new.
It's as well, let me be if necessary, the first one to give you permission to just go for it. Like like you never know that whether some editor will like, even if they sort of care about like, does this person have publications before? If they like the piece, they're going to go with it, and they're not going to care if you've written stuff before. Like this is your permission to just shoot your shot and go for it. Like let me be your hype man, your permission, like give you whatever helps you feel better about just going for it. Because you never know what can happen. I mean, the worst they say is no. Okay, whatever. They said no, you move on and find somewhere else. It's, someone saying no to publishing is not the worst thing that could happen. It's obviously not what you want, but so what, they said no, like their loss. You move on. You can move on and find someone someone's gonna appreciate what you wrote and get it out there.
Also, there are like plenty more editor fish in the publishing sea, so like you can just try somebody else.
Yep, just do the whole mass email thing and somebody's gonna bite, and you will get your yes. And I'd also like to plug or re-up Molly's point. We're always happy to publish on our Medium page if that's a place that you'd like to start. If you're having trouble getting published, or if you just for some reason really want to be on our Medium page, hit us up and we are happy to talk through that. Any other questions? Okay, don't feel like this is the cutoff point. If you have questions later, that's fine. We're just going to kind of seamlessly transition now into this portion of the event where we are modifying something slightly. I think as opposed to going out into breakout rooms, we can stay in this large group to workshop ideas that folks may have, just so everybody has the benefit of everybody's opinions or suggestions or feedback. So if folks are cool with that and comfortable sharing ideas that you're already thinking about, or publications that you're thinking about pitching something to, please feel free to just, unmute yourself and throw those things out, and we can talk through that stuff. Or I can keep talking, which I think is not the preferred thing here. Leah.
I can throw out. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Leah.
Sorry, I was just going to ask another question that was going to like segue into maybe an idea. Do you guys like when you're coming up with op-ed ideas, like do you think about how to, just because like I feel like in our like clickbaity world, people are always trying to be like, like this really controversial thing, it's actually like this, like more, like something where it's like, I don't know, do you think about how to frame your pieces like that? Or are you just like, this is the idea I want to get across? Like, so like where I was going with this is the West Virginia v. EPA case that just had oral arguments where it's like, it seems like they're going to get rid of the administrative state or something. And it's like, that's like something we were just talking about in our PPP, like small groups the other day about, it feels like administrative law is like an issue that is so impacts our lives so much, like especially with like the EPA and like climate change and stuff, but just people aren't super aware of it. And like even I wasn't until I took like admin. So I was just thinking like if like something like that just seems so dry. That's like, I don't know how, but like, so would you, if you wanted to do something like that, would you like pair it with something? How do you guys think about like how to make people like want to be interested in this issue that actually is really important, but like it seems super dry?
I think for me personally, connecting like literally anything you're writing, but especially stuff that is just generally seen to be boring, connecting that to the real practical consequences. I think Madiba brought that up earlier, makes it real for people, because for people who are like not steeped in law school classrooms or having to read these cases or listen to oral arguments, they rightfully and understandably are like dealing with so many other things in their lives that this stuff is like at the bottom of the priority totem pole. But just writing in a clear, direct, and concise way, this is what just happened. This is how it impacts regular people. I think a lot of times in my personal experience has made things more digestible, more accessible, and thereby less dry and boring, because, when you're connecting this case to how it's impacting climate change and what that means for all of us who have to live in this world, then it suddenly becomes something that's a little more urgent than it just being presented as West Virginia v. EPA. Let's talk about this Supreme Court case. But others feel free to add to that.
No, I think you're so right. Yeah, I think you definitely need to make it clear what it means for people. And I think there are potentially ways to do that even without getting too much into this sort of annoying clickbaity thing. But as you were just talking about how dry the APA can seem, or is, I'm thinking you can definitely make it exciting for people who don't know anything about it. If you're just oh, the Supreme Court is hearing a case on these administrative procedure grounds. Here's what that means for your ability to breathe on this planet. I think you can just sort of drive home these things aren't some arcane things that's happening in the ether, but they have real life consequences. I think that's probably the best way to sort of make it matter in an op-ed way. Because if you were writing a law review article, then yeah, you could just get into all the nitty-gritty administrative procedure type stuff, and you're still going to keep that audience. But if you're trying to reach regular people, you're going to want to say why it is that this matters. So getting rid of the APA means that these agencies could do or rather could be disempowered from doing the things we need them to do. Or yeah, so I feel there are ways that you can make it make sense in a way that isn't so disconnected and removed from people's lives.
Yeah, 100%. And the EPA is a great example of this. Why does the EPA matter? Turns out it's nice to live on a planet that isn't on fire. I think I'm not the first person to raise this criticism. I won't be the last to raise this criticism. So don't, this is not an original thought, but like, I think something that like liberal left, especially lawyers, don't do a lot is they sort of, it's easy to flip into like the abstraction of something. Like when you like, because like, so just to run with the West Virginia VP example, like the non-delegation doctrine, it's easy to talk about that in like the abstract structural terms that it's often described in, because it's sort of like you think about like what non-delegation means, like, oh, it's easy to slip into like, oh, it's Congress can't delegate legislative, whatever. That's not the real problem when you get down to it. Like the real problem is like how that affects like the real life issues that that issue touches, like that whole doctrine touches. I mean, and I think like, you can talk about non-delegation in like, you can talk about it and say like it's bad because whatever, but you're like, it's really the problem with it isn't like law unto itself. It's law because the problem is with the law because it touches real life things. I mean, I think it, like, not to get a little too glib, but like law is politics. Like it is. There's no way to divorce law from politics. So like bringing these high-minded legal discussions back into the real political discussions that they really are, I think has a lot of value.
I'd add one thing on that, which is I think like the power of examples is what we're talking about here. I think examples are so powerful, and I think, again, to say on the example of West Virginia v. EPA, it's a good one because you can talk about like systemic examples. You can talk about kind of the future of our collective humanity. I worry that people feel like they need to like cut themselves and make themselves bleed in public all the time. And like that, like thinking about what's going to happen at the end of the Supreme Court term and all of the people who are going to have to like write horrible, horrible articles that are super painful to write about why they need access to abortion, or why as a trans person they need access to healthcare, or why as a person of color in the South they need to be able to vote. Like, and like those stories are incredible and valuable, and like I have so much respect for the people who are able to do that. But I think it's important to remember that like you can paint a compelling picture, you can tell a really compelling story without having to like put your own trauma on display. And I think that like finding ways to do that can make a really, really good op-ed without it needing to like be a traumatic experience, because writing should not have to be a traumatic experience. And like, we should not have to do that to make people care about these issues. And I think there are lots and lots of ways to come up with, again, whether it's data, whether it's anecdotal, whether it's sort of big picture issues, to make people care without having to go through that.
Thank you for reminding us of that point. You do not have to do a trauma dump to make yourself feel worthy of being published. Write whatever you feel like writing, and the chips will fall where they may. Any other questions or ideas that folks have brainstormed that you may want additional feedback or want to ask questions about?
I have one. I'll like piggyback off that. Oh, go ahead, Michaela.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I was gonna say, and this is like both like a question and like an idea of like pairing like an op-ed with like a particular like campaign we're doing. If there are any strategies you have around that, because I know some of our chapters have been like talking about like the kind of clients like law firms take, and like whether like kind of pairing an op-ed about like why big corporations don't necessarily deserve like legal representation, like to like kind of preempt that argument is like if you have any like suggestions for like how to do that.
I love that idea. I feel like this is like a regular conversation in my household, and I would like love to see that like in an article someplace. And I think what I would want to drive home if I were you, so think about how it's not like companies that have like a Sixth Amendment like right to counsel and stuff, right? Like it's about like the right to counsel is about like an individual's right to like have an attorney like prove the government's burden before putting them in jail and like taking away their liberty, like incarcerating them, right? Be like, that is a far cry from saying like a company has a right to like use child labor or something. So I think it's like really worth distinguishing these, because I think there's this like real sort of like pervasive desire to be like, well, everybody needs a lawyer and stuff, like everybody has like a right to counsel and stuff. And it's like, I mean, like, yes, but like these things are not the same, and we should not like equate them as if like, you know, like defending, like being a public defender is not the same as being I don't know, some big corporation's attorney to help them chop down the rainforest or something. Like, yeah, these things are not equivalent. And I think it would be like very worthwhile to make that clear. And I would just like, exactly, Molly. Yeah. And I think there are like good examples to elucidate that. And I think that's an area where you can like make the Constitution real for people.
Yeah, and I think like something that's in like just going off of that, like I think something that like it's really, or I think something that happens all the time is that people try to twist these sort of things that I think we all would agree are good. Like, yeah, like I think, you know, don't want to speak for everyone here, but I feel like everyone here sort of agrees that like it's good when criminal defendants have counsel and like force the government to carry its burden. Like, I feel like we would all agree that that's a good thing. But it's easy to twist those things into, well, I mean, easy for some, I should say, to twist those things into things that sound like good things, but as soon as you start scratching at the surface, it's not good. Like the example that I'm thinking of right now is like when you hear guys like Alan Dershowitz or whoever talk about like, you know, the like everyone like writes like everyone needs a lawyer or whatever. Like there's a big difference between a public defender defending someone and forcing the government to carry its burden and follow the process correctly versus, you know, some giant company getting to hire, you know, some massive law firm to completely outwork or like bury the opposition. Like there's a big difference between that thing. And something that I think gets lost a lot is like there are moral choices that go into those things, and that there are people's choices of what they do, and especially, and this includes who you choose to represent. That's a moral choice, and there are moral consequences for those choices. You can't get out. You can't just, you know, make them go away. Like if you choose to represent like the most venal and the most like banked up people, like that says something about you. And those you can't ever get away from those consequences as much as you might like try to complain and make them go away. I think this is where like all the people complaining about cancel culture get me like all angry about, because they want to have the ability to say whatever they want, and they want to divorce themselves from the moral consequences that come from sticking by an idea. You can't ever get away from it.
Yeah, I'll just add everyone generally refers to people, which companies are not, but that'll be my little literal ones in on that. But no, Michaela, I think that, you know, marrying campaigns to op-eds are always an effective idea that, you know, in my experience, I think really helped to get an op-ed read, the amplification of that, something that is feasible. Other questions, ideas, loving the conversation and the thoughtfulness of these questions.
I've got one last one that I actually think fits with like both of those. And actually, like Medivh, I really appreciated hearing this because I also have just like a Google Doc of random ideas, and this was one of them I think I've been thinking about. And I think along a similar vein to like what we see firms doing and who they're representing. I mean, something that like I've thought about a lot, particularly coming from my last position where we relied really heavily on pro bono attorneys. It's something that I struggle with, just like, would anybody else actually care about this, like outside of this room? But like the entire system of pro bono lawyering is kind of just bullshit, basically, you know, like it's reputation laundering, you know, like, and there is like public perception of things like greenwashing, where like, you know, it doesn't really matter that Chevron uses, you know, compostable plates in their cafeterias, you know, like they're still destroying the environment. And I just don't see the same awareness of that around law firms. And like the fact that like, you know, Gibson Dunn can come out and say like, oh, we represented a veteran in housing court, you know, like, well, they're just destroying the entire country, like our whole legal system. But it's hard for me to, when I think of like sitting down to write that, I'm just like, I'm really interested in this. And I know other people who would be, but just like, I don't know, like my mom's probably not going to care, you know, like, because the average person see how that actually impacts their life, you know, and like, how do you kind of make that come across?
I think there's room for this article, like even if it doesn't break through to like everybody, like non-lawyer populations, because I don't think it's a conversation that's had enough even among lawyers. So I think it would be still like worthwhile from just like a legal culture perspective. Like I think you're making some like extremely good points. And yeah, folks have like barely touched on these issues. I'm recalling many moons ago, I had applied for and didn't get a fellowship by a prestigious law firm. I'm not going to name them, and to like do that, they were going to like give me a stipend basically to do some public service work. And I was really bummed about not getting it. And a friend of mine at the time was like, I mean, also, wouldn't that kind of be like working in Exxon's parks department? Like, like this, like, I think the idea of like reputational laundering is like very real. And folks sort of like sleep on that. And even though some of these like big law places do very valuable pro bono work. Like I've definitely benefited from having like pro bono counsel when working on issues before. But I think it's really valid to sort of say, how does that weigh though against all the other stuff that's being done? Like, is this just, you know, like one drop in the bucket? Like what's going on there? And so I don't think it's just you that cares about that. I don't think it's just this room that cares about that. I think that there are a lot of lawyers and like law students and people like adjacent to law culture who would be interested in such a piece. There'll be some who wouldn't be interested per se, but would get really worked up by it as well, which is its own good. So, but yeah, I think it's worth pursuing.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, you know, we didn't really talk about like the backlash component sometimes of publishing pieces. And, you know, I think that there's, you know, a conversation that can be had about like the stresses of that, but also just like the upsides of that. And, you know, just kind of like dovetailing on Madiba's points. I think it's certainly a piece that would start a dialogue. I don't know if anybody is active. I am not personally with law Twitter, but it can be quite insufferable. But I think that it's a dialogue that would definitely be sparked, for example, on Twitter specifically as a platform. But I think another piece of just kind of like writing these types of op-eds where you're starting a discourse that may not necessarily be popular, but that can get minds turning about things, especially people who work within these spaces, because I have tons of friends who like work in these law firms to pay off debt or whatever. And, you know, sometimes just hear them complaining about, for example, the restrictions that they even have on how much pro bono they can even do. And so a lot of times I think whether it's campaigns, writing op-eds, or doing them both together, it almost forces through a public shaming component these institutions to do some reputational laundering of their own and, you know, kind of modify their policies, even if it's not overhauling the entire issue, but to get them to do better in some respect. So not saying that's something that could possibly come of, you know, an article like that, but I think it's something that is possible to get them to do more good than they already are doing. So I'd be happy to read something like that.
I'd like to give a quick addendum too, is that I feel like lawyers are uniquely concerned about reputation and, you know, like image and like how we're perceived and stuff. And so I'll just say, like, I think it would get some attention if there's something that, you know, causes some like criticism and like reflection of attorneys or like firms' reputations. That's the kind of thing that I think folks care about.
Yeah, it just made me laugh about thinking like when you see law firm associate or partner bios and they're like, did this horrible thing, this one too, and this one too, but maintains an active pro bono caseload. Sorry, just had to like get that random thought bouncing in my head out of my mouth. Madeline, or is that how I'm pronouncing your name correctly? Okay.
Hi, thank you all so much. This has been incredibly helpful. And this is definitely more of sort of an open-ended question. I think just reflecting and thinking that because some legal topics are just genuinely really complicated to understand, unnecessary or like traditionalist jargon aside, how do you personally practice communicating like those kind of complex legal topics clearly in your writing to avoid alienating your audience?
Reread it and try think about, like if you were not like marinating in like law culture for like the past however many years, if it would still make sense to you. Like reread it and think about like, is this component like necessary? Or like what are the things that need to be said in order to make the point? Are there things I could or should strip away from this? I think this is also like or a valuable component would be consulting with a non-lawyer like friend or family member, just so you can be like how does this read to you? Like, is this intelligible at all? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes I'd be like, I have no idea what that word means. And then you might be like, oh, okay, maybe I should either use a different word or like make it clear earlier in the piece, like what this word means in this context. So yeah, I think taking a step back and doing some editing and doing some consulting with folks is very useful there.
Yeah, something that I do as well. Like I do all that stuff too because it's extremely useful. And like I won't, I'll let Mediva's words speak for themselves. But I think something as well is also like this was a trick I learned from my past life as a software engineer. Was while you're working on something, pretending to explain it to someone sitting right there. Like they call it rubber duck debugging when you're doing this for software. Like that's, whatever. Like, because you're literally supposed to like have a rubber duck sitting on your desk and you explain your code to someone. That's where the idea comes from. But it works just as well for when you're writing a piece. It's basically like while you're working on it, sort of like stop, pretend you're explaining it to someone sitting right next to you. And I catch myself doing this all the time, that I'll like slip into like, a more complicated way of putting something. And I'll just stop and realize like if like what I put on the page and what I just sort of said out loud or thought to myself about how to explain it, they're totally different. And that's a sign that I need to change what I wrote to make it more like what I said, because what I said will be clearer.
So I know it's about 11:35 now, and I know it's a Saturday morning. So unless folks have other questions that like are burning on your heart, I think it's okay if we wrap this up now. A few quick announcements. This has been recorded, so I think we'll be sending out this recording if you find it useful to you to rewatch it, or if you want to share it with someone who wasn't able to make it today. Second point, if you are writing your op-ed or you already have one written or pitching it after this, PPP would love to help you if you find it useful to have that other set of eyes on a piece. We're happy to look at it and add any edits or suggestions or feedback that you may find to be helpful. And we would love for you to update us and let us know when, not if, these pieces are published, so we can help to uplift them on our social media. Last thing, we just recently started this thing at PPP, these coffee chats where law students and lawyers specifically are free to sign up to do like a 30-minute one-on-one with either myself, Molly, or Steve to vent about law school, to talk about what it means to be a lawyer committed to justice, or really whatever you want to talk about, building progressive power in this organizing space, particularly as law students and as lawyers. So if you find that you would benefit, however, from that, we are happy to schedule those through Calendly, which I just recently learned about and am kind of obsessed with. But if anybody has anything else, please feel free to chime in now. And if not, I just want to thank everybody for joining us this morning. I really, really appreciate seeing everyone and hope that this was helpful to you all. And huge thank you to Deanne and Mediva. You all have been fabulous, and I'm really, really grateful for your participation this morning. If nothing else, I will let you all go. Enjoy your Saturdays and enjoy the rest of your weekends, and stay as well as you can in this weird world. I'll talk to everybody later. Bye.